We're looking at this series we began last couple of weeks ago on love, and we've been looking at this very well-known but challenging chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. And we've been looking at it in the context of its context, and that it is a rebuke or a redress to a group of Christians who are known for their lack of love. In fact, of all the churches of the New Testament, we discover that probably if you were to rank them best to worst, then Corinth would be kind of the worst church in the New Testament. And the evidences of all kinds of worship paraphernalia were around them, but because they lacked love, it was as if nothing was of any value. And Jesus speaks plainly about how his disciples are to live and to behave and to love. One of the famous passages that Jesus talked about in John chapter 8 is that he said, if you abide, my disciples he's talking about, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. And so abiding in his word is also abiding in his way, and his way is the way of love. If you abide, then you are my disciples. I don't know if you have a standard New Testament lexicon for the New Testament Greek at home, but if you have, you can look up the word disciple, and in that definition it will say this: a disciple is one or a person who engages in learning through instruction from another, a pupil or an apprentice. At its most basic, to become a disciple of Jesus is to become a learner in the ways and the word of the Lord Jesus Christ. Each time I drive down past our old building site down at Jenke Circuit, I'm reminded of the kids, 3 kids at least out of my family, who we've put L plates on and driven around that car park. I'm sure many of you who are a part of our church for a long time have done that. And it reminded me about L plates and how important they are. But when somebody has an L plate on their car, everybody else on the road kind of goes, well, if they're nice people, they kind of go, okay, that person's learning. So we won't be too harsh on them if they come in my lane, or they take that corner a little bit sloppy, or they drive too fast, or slow, or whatever it might be. Recently they've introduced a thing that you can put on your vehicle. After you get your L's, you get your what? Your P's, but there's also another one called an R. I don't know if you've seen them around the place. Somebody who's been in a car accident can apply for what's called an R plate. And an R plate is to stand for recovering. So people who've been in traffic accidents, who've got their licence, but want to come back on the road, but are nervous about that, obviously, because the anxiety of a car accident, my goodness, can put an R plate on there, and that can be that everybody knows that they're recovering from something. So hopefully we as a society go, you know what, the L plates, they're just learning, and the P plates, they're kind of past that a little bit, but those R plates, those people have had a trauma in their life and they're recovering. So we all accommodate that. In terms of discipleship, we are all on our L plates, all of us. A famous philosopher, not as famous as Craig, but another philosopher, a Christian philosopher, said, a disciple is a learner, a student, an apprentice, a practitioner. Disciples of Jesus are people who do not just profess certain views as their own, but apply their growing understanding of life in the kingdom of the heavens to every aspect of their life on earth. So 1 Corinthians 13 is Paul teaching these learner Christians about how to drive, if you like, or to live in a way that is more accurate in terms of being a disciple. Now, we looked at the first week of this sort of axiom that everything minus love really equals nothing. So it doesn't matter what sort of posture you have, how many spiritual gifts you have, what the music's like, how big the church is, all that sort of stuff. None of that matters at all if you have not love. So we can grow a big church, we can have all bells and whistles and, blah, 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 and be the talk of the town, but if we don't have love, we might as well pack it up and leave. That's the equation of the New Testament. So we're kind of rescuing this passage from the arena of simply the romantic or the sentimental or of weddings, and attributing it to its proper context. Because the love is the criteria, or love is the criteria of everything we do and everything we say. We are to love God and love people. And our own spiritual maturity, our own sense of learning, our own progress as disciples is measured not by our posturing or even our words, but by our love. So if we are growing as a group of disciples of Jesus, therefore so should our love for one another and for the world in which we live. Paul is writing to a church where he's basically saying, you are terrible at love. You are terrible at love. So do the opposite of what you are doing now. One of my favourite TV characters is a guy called George Costanza, who was voted the greatest all-time sitcom character. And he's a mess. He's just this bowl of anxiety. He's like Woody Allen meets something else, and it's just this weird kind of thing. But he very famously said, when he was on a date with someone, said, I'm the opposite of every man you've ever met. We need to do the opposite of what Corinth were doing, and that's why it's in the Bible, so that we could see that. So we've been learning that love requires the presence and character of Jesus in our lives, and it produces a love in our character. But we don't do that by simply trying really hard to become a more loving person. God, would you just give me more lovable people and I'll be a more loving person? Paul doesn't say that. Nor does he say, go and find more lovable people to be around. Paul says, commit to allowing God's love to grow you into a more loving person. Because love is patient and love is kind, but we are not, but God's love is. Love is beyond envy, which we'll talk about next week. To love means to have a changing orientation. So what we are learning affects how we are driving. What we are learning affects how we are living. And to love means to have that orientation change. So today we're going to look at another statement, but this is the first statement, or one of the first statements, of what love is not. And we'll learn from that in terms of the positive. Paul says that love is not irritable. I wonder if you have not irritations, but you have become an irritable person. Because there's a difference, isn't it? Because we all get irritated by things in life. But that's different than becoming an irritable person. Because life is full of irritants. As I said last week, you may be sitting next to yours now. We don't know. An irritant is anything that causes us frustration and exasperation. A boss's unreasonable requests or poor service at a restaurant, or a relative who is deliberately rude, or a co-worker that makes you feel bad or look small at a meeting. You're running late, I'm running late. Irritations are part of our lives and we've got to live with them. But there's a difference between having irritations in our life and becoming an irritable person. So we're going to look at that, because everybody at times is irritable. But that doesn't go too well on our sign. You know, we say everybody's welcome. We could change that to everybody's irritable. Nothing, nobody's perfect, but it doesn't sort of ring the same way. Love is not that. Love is not irritable. And we're going to talk about that a little bit through the course of the day. And we're going to focus on the good things of God. But I don't want you to panic, because we are all irritable at times. In fact, I may be part of your irritation right now. Who knows? But we all can be irritating, and we can have irritants in our lives, but we don't want to become an irritable person. The Bible never says love never gets angry, because it does. Anger is an emotion that we experience when our will is frustrated, but irritability is a mood that can quickly settle as a disposition. Moods last longer than emotions. There are basically a couple of types of moods, aren't there? There are good moods and bad moods, and you'll have come with either today. I'm in a pretty good mood. Had some Weet-Bix. Left a warm house for a warm car into a warm building. Going to have soup. I'm in the presence of a doctor. It's all good today. I'm in a good mood. Aren't you pleased? Next week, I might be in a bad mood. And you'll know. Good moods and bad moods. I wonder what sort of mood you are in today. Moodiness is deeply related also to our spiritual condition, because we're whole people. If we really believe that there is a God who created everything and that he is working everything for good, not only good, but our good, then we can't help but be in a good mood. Love and joy and peace will be the default mode of a good mood. But we know that irritants come into our lives to affect our moods and therefore our state. Our minds are probably where we think those thoughts more than other places. By the way, Just a question, who's in charge of your mind? I don't know if you ever thought about that. Who's in charge of your mind? Who's running the program department of your thoughts? Well, the answer is you. You all have thoughts right now. Some of you are thinking about what I'm talking about. Some of you are thinking about yesterday, whatever. Some of you are thinking about what you're doing after this and what sort of soup you're going to have and all that sort of stuff and what's happening tomorrow and this problem and that debt and this. And so thoughts are kind of gathering in our minds. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? I often have the experience when I'm preaching to be thinking about something else. That's probably pretty obvious, isn't it? But you could be in this moment, I'm in this moment, but I'm thinking about something else. Who has control of your thoughts? You. In fact, the Bible tells us we have control of our thoughts. It actually encourages us to keep every thought or keep captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. So we have the power of thoughts. That's why cults, before they attack your wallet, they attack your mind. They get you to not think. Just empty your minds. I've heard worship leaders say that in churches. I want you to just empty your mind of all things and just let Jesus come in. Well, that might sound kind of worshipy, but it's not. It's kind of dangerous. We need to be thoughtful when we worship. We need to know what we're singing is true before we sing it. Otherwise, we're just in that dangerous zone. So we need to take captive our thoughts. That's why if we fill our minds with nonsense and garbage, we'll think about that sort of stuff. Nearly 3 years ago, I had a 6-month battle with vertigo. I had this thing called Meniere's disease. And I went to the very aptly named dizziness clinic. I thought it was a joke. Somebody said, you've got to go to the dizziness clinic. So I went to the dizziness clinic. And they put me on a little bit of medication and tapped me on the head and told me to do these exercises. But I had 6 months where, man, I would go into a room and I wouldn't know if I'd be able to stand up. And I remember saying to the church, listen, if I fall off the stage, it's not because I've had too many drinks or whatever it is, I cannot stand up. And it'd end up in me vomiting, all kinds of things. Anyway, I had to go get a pretty serious set of scans, brain scans. And these brain scans, they put this thing right close to your eyes to test all neuro activity. It was only 25 minutes. But I'm a little claustrophobic as well, and I'm a little fat. And so it was really hard to fit in that hole, and my shoulders were touching the sides of this hole. And I'm thinking, I don't know what hell's like, but it's got to be, it's just awful. I couldn't see, I was feeling it, and I was sweating and feeling so uncomfortable. It was just horrible. And then I thought, I shall play golf in my mind. And so I started on the first tee at Murrumbidgee Golf Club, and I thought I'm going to play 9 holes of golf in these 20 minutes and let my mind go away somewhere else because my body is in a really uncomfortable situation. I still sliced it off the tee and missed putts. And that's just my muscle memory, you know. Still 3-putting and all that stuff, right? But it was an enormous help to me. And it taught me a little bit about the power of the mind. That the mind has a tremendous power to be of advantage or disadvantage to us. So we need to practice this, taking captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. And if we're indulging in stuff that's junking that up, we need to get rid of that. Dismiss it. Get help for it, whatever it is, because it will ruin your thought process in that sense. An irritable person is someone who comes sort of predisposed to becoming angry. It's kind of their default setting, and we never want to be a default angry person. Doesn't mean we don't get angry about something, doesn't mean we don't get irritable about something. But if that is what we are known for, to be irritable people, then that's a problem. And when it becomes a default or a settled part of our character, we ask the question, where does an irritable person go to get angry? The answer is everywhere, in everything, at all times. They look to things and find fault in everything. If it's a sunny day, it's too hot. If it's a cooler day, it's too cold. If it's raining, it's not raining hard enough. If it hasn't rained, it should rain. And it becomes a default setting. Now, I'm not talking about optimistic thinking here. I'm talking about a good sense of proportion in terms of the world in which we live. Because it is hard, isn't it? Because we live in an age of outrage. Which, depending on which media you watch, over here or over there or somewhere in the middle, they're both equally outraged about the same thing for different reasons. And we have the ability now just to consume one and only be in one and form our views about that because of that one. Or we go over here and form a different view about the same issue over here because we're only just into that one. The Bible tells us that love does not also keep a record of wrongs. Now, we all have records in our minds. Some of us have very elaborate filing systems in our minds where we keep our record of wrongs. But love, as the love of God grows in your life, those records can be displaced and even gotten rid of. Very often we can bring back to our awareness on a very regular and easy basis those records of wrongs. It's interesting that we are so vigilant about our record of wrongs of other people to us, but we're not so good at keeping records of our wrongs to other people. But we can replay events time and time again and feel this surge of anger and emotion, and sometimes with good reason because of the injustice of a situation. And then we quickly can devolve into a kind of self-pity or a sulking, and we become cynical and sceptical about everything and everybody. And we make statements like, well, I just don't do people. I just don't do community. I don't do church. I don't do that. And then we find other people to tell our story to who reinforce, encourage us in our story, in our pain, and then we sort of trauma bond over that, and then we've got a mess. Well, Paul is saying don't be like that. If you want to live in community, if you want to follow Jesus Christ, there's a different way to do life, and that's the way of love. And it's not a syrupy love, it's not a hallmark love, it's a love that decides to take those thoughts captive and to push on even around the irritants and things that make us angry. I hear this stuff all the time, but I hear it mostly in me. There's a great writer called Frederick Butcher, and he once said, of the 7 deadly sins, anger is probably the most fun. He said, to lick our wounds, to smack our lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontation still to come, to savour to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back in many ways. It's a feast fit for a king. The chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. And that's what happens when we become irritable, record of bad stuff people. We do it because we do it, and our minds are not captive to the things. Song, and thanks to our ongoing thanks to our musicians and singers who help us and lead us in our worship, in our singing and worship. Well, let me just sort of give you a biblical example of what we're talking about in terms of love not becoming irritable, because love does keep records, and so it should. Love just doesn't keep a record of wrongs. That's different, isn't it? Love needs to keep a record because our memories are very good and great and gifted things from God, and we're good at memory keeping, and we can orientate our life to dwell on the things that are worth remembering and to forget what is behind and to push forward towards the goal. That doesn't mean we're in denial about what's happened in our past, but it means that we need at some point to go, we need to deal with that and then move towards the things God has for us. Because love remembers gifts to be grateful to God, and it remembers the qualities of other people. It thinks the best of people instead of the first instance being the worst. It remembers moments of joy that we get to savour and celebrate. I'm sure as you were singing some of that, I was singing of the goodness of God, you were thinking about, boy, God has been so good to me when I haven't been so good to him or good to others. He's been so good, he's been so faithful. Love remembers reasons to hope and reasons to have faith and reasons to seek justice and reasons to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Love does keep records, and so it should. It just doesn't keep a record of wrongs. And you might think, well, that's fine in your life. Your life seems to be going pretty well and you seem a fairly optimistic person. Well, that's true. I'm a fairly optimistic person. But that doesn't mean that if you're not an optimistic person, doesn't mean that we can actually dwell on the things to be thankful for. Paul puts it like this, the apostle. He said, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think, not feel, think about those things. So whatever it might be, the Bible points to thinking, this thinking comes from all over the place. Whatever is good, right, noble, admirable. In the world of the scriptures, in the world of every day, we wake up and see a beautiful morning or even a bad morning, and we wake up to food, we wake up to fellowship and company and relationships and all that sort of stuff. Think about this stuff, because this stuff is the stuff of life. This is the stuff that dwells our mind on the things that bring goodness to us. Now I'm crackling a bit here. It might be me, it might be you, I don't know. Irritable people, if it's become a disposition, don't dwell on things that enrich. In fact, they do the opposite. They dwell on the things that make us poor in terms of our future. There you go. If only there was a doctor of philosophy could help. Sorry, Craig. I'm going to apologise to Craig after. Is that all right? We're all good. Is that right? It might have been me bending that over. Is that better? Right. You just stand there. That'll be fun. But love isn't irritable. Boy, I'm irritated now. Let me tell you a real quick story, because we've got a great song and then we've got soup. So wouldn't you want me to move on? Yeah, you would. Of course you would. One of the famous stories in the Old Testament is between this guy, King Saul, and his protege David, if you like. And they had a big battle in Israel. It was Game of Thrones type battle. And at the end of the battle, it was found out that Saul, the king, and that's Saul the king, had slain or killed thousands of the enemy. And so the people began to sing songs of celebration about Saul and his great and mighty deeds. David, who was a warrior, he also, should I just swap these? Yeah, who was also a warrior, he was known to have slain, which is not a great word, but slain tens of thousands. So Saul, thousands, a national hero, everybody singing songs of celebration about him. David, tens of thousands, and they sing songs about him. But Saul has a very angry and irritable disposition. So while they're celebrating David, King Saul is deeply, deeply upset. And he is so irritable and in such a bad mood that he thinks thoughts like this: the people love David more than they love me. I'll probably never get the credit I deserve. David's probably going to take my crown, and it is my crown, and I'm going to keep my crown at all costs. I can't share this glory or this victory with anyone. So they have this great national victory, and the king is saying, sucks to be me. That's probably not in any of the versions that you've got. But Saul, at that point, could have and should have been in a great mood. Israel had just won a great victory. Saul was the king. Saul had songs written about him. It was just that pesky David was more popular than Saul. And we'll get to envy next week. Saul's habitual thoughts only produced resentment and ripened into hatred, and he became so embittered, if you know the story from the Old Testament Samuel, he became so embittered, he eventually tries to seek to kill David. Because if he can't be as good as David, he wants to get rid of David. This has much more to do than simply being in a bad mood.
This can be destructive stuff. In Colossians, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God." And then verse 2 is a very interesting one. So set your hearts on these things, but then set your minds on things above, not earthly things. Well, we spend most of our life on earthly things, don't we? For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you shall also appear with him in glory. This isn't just a verse about heaven. This is a verse about orientating both our hearts and our heads, our minds. Love keeps no record of wrongs, wrong all the time. That enables us to become this irritable, sulking people. And we don't want to be like that. We want to acknowledge when bad stuff happens in our life, because it happens in your life, and it certainly happens in my life. Stuff that we could become embittered about, and a bitter root could form in our spirit about. But the antidote to that, in fact, is to dwell on that which is noble, and to think about that which is pure, to think about that which is honourable and just and lovely and commendable and excellent. If there is anything worthy of praise, think about that stuff. So, let us not join the worst church in the world in being a place of religious activity with a lack of love. Because everything minus love means nothing. It means nothing. Not a little bit, it means nothing. Zero, zip, nada, duck egg, nothing. But let's also acknowledge that we're all learners. I'm a learner as much as you are a learner. And let's be sensitive to each other in our learning. Because some of our behaviour just comes out of a lack of practice or a lack of learning. So let's learn. Let's come to church, let's learn, let's join a group, let's go to a Bible study, let's get online to good quality Bible stuff and get the Word of God in us so that we can be abiding in that Word. And when we're abiding in that Word, we will be abiding in His way. Because Jesus said at the end of the sermon what He said at the beginning of it, that if you abide in my Word, you will truly be my disciples. So we need to keep our eyes on Him.